All right, here we go. So before I delve into my content, I want to respectfully acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, which is a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, which include the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, the Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwa, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. So I'd really like to open with that because it's a practice in actively thinking about where you are and appreciating that there's so much more than you would have considered just day-to-day going about your business. You may have noticed that this is a practice that kind of popped up among public bodies when a meeting starts in the last few years. That's a result of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action for working towards reconciliation. So it's new for settlers, but it's actually a practice that's been done for thousands of years by First Nations individuals. It's just actually acknowledging where you are and being in the moment and thinking about the history that's beyond you, which I kind of like because it ties in today's presentation. Just one of the key things that I want you to take away from this is being aware and appreciative of what's around you and what you have. That's a practice that actually really helps you engage with the world in a more effective way. So today's reason for the topic is an instructor emailed us and said, I have a student in my class who, when he refers to office workers or administrative workers, he will say the girls in a hypothetical sense. Probably from his experience, those people have always been girls, so he doesn't even think about changing the topic to professionals. But it really kind of irked some people. It was kind of a sore spot, like saying, okay, you're just narrowing these people down from their skills to their perceived gender. So how do I tackle something like that without raising conflict and moving forward in a positive way? So I'm going to touch on what kind of privileges exist out there, what exactly is a privilege, and what might we have compared to others. I'll also include some diversity that you may or may not see. It's a big iceberg of things. I'm going to talk about how to engage in allyhood behaviors to actually effectively tackle these sorts of issues within your day-to-day situations, and how you can translate that to your work, your classroom, or your life. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. This is going to go away. I'll share my screen. And to kick it off, I'm going to show you this video. So this was popular, I want to say like in the last 10 years. You may have seen it, but it'll set the tone for kind of where I'm coming from.
Hey, line up! Line up! Everybody line up! We're about to race! Everybody line up! Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. And we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. A $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability. You don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the league that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
So what I really like about that activity was that he laid out, okay, so privilege has nothing to do with what you've done. It's kind of, you were born into it, now that's your normal. So it's easy for us to not see it until it's directly pointed out. But like he said too, we don't want to face that because it's painful to realize that, you know, not mediocrity, but the idea that you got to where you are on merit, you haven't necessarily, because you did get some head starts. So from this video, the way I kind of view it is we're all on different playing fields, and your playing field is your normal. And when we tend to look out at the world and other people, we kind of judge them based on where our playing field is right here. And we expect them to kind of play by the same rules when really their playing field might be over here. And we say, well, I did these things, I can achieve these things, what's your problem? Why can't you come up to my level? Where a lot of our conflicts arise when it comes to things like privilege and clashing from diversity that way. So when we hear the term check your privilege, that's when people, at least in my experience, tend to get defensive because it sounds like your opinion shouldn't matter because you're ahead in life. You're kind of the oppressor, so I don't want to hear what you have to say, which isn't necessarily the case. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So privilege is an advantage or an immunity granted or only available to a certain group. That's the dictionary definition of it. So some examples of that you might see are you're part of a majority group in a country or a city. You have access to money. You're here at least, you might be white, a man, straight or cis, meaning you identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth. You might be educated. So again, these things, as you go about your life, that's kind of your normal. So you don't see it as a, wow, that's a big leg up, because that's what you've always had. And when someone says check your privilege, it's really just a reminder and an ask for you to say, step back from the picture for a bit and think about where your playing field is compared to other people's playing fields. So we'll talk about how to meet in the middle with those playing fields. Another analogy that I really like to think of often is we, who are privileged, tend to be like bulls in a china shop. And you think of yourself as a good bull. You didn't mean to knock over the china, but as you walk through, you kind of smash a few dishes, but you didn't mean to. that can be a way of seeing that even if you're not trying to be harmful, sometimes even your presence alone is just a reminder, and it's adding salt to a wound that's already there. So you're going to be the bad guy in someone's life sometimes. That's kind of hard to avoid. It might happen without you intending to. That's not the bad thing. What makes the difference is how you choose to work on that in the future. Because sometimes you're going to smash China. How do you rectify that going forward? But it's also important to remember that privileges are intersectional. And that means that it can be crossed over with some oppression. So you might, for example, be a white guy, but you also grew up in poverty, and when you were 15, you had to work to help your parents get out of bankruptcy. So that's very different from someone else who's also a white guy, but didn't have to pay for college. So a lot of us actually experience that. Even though we have privileges, you also have oppressions too, and that kind of affects how you go through life and how you perceive others and how they perceive you. So it's important to remember when dealing with any sort of individual, even if you think you know their privilege on the surface, there's still a lot more underneath, a lot of history there that you might not recognize. It's affecting how they go about situations. Meaning their behavior isn't necessarily who they are. And that's another big point of this presentation, separating people from behavior. We'll talk more about that too. So some of the diversity, obviously, that you'll have in your classroom, most of which you might not see, is your personality, your gender identity, your sexual orientation, your culture, your religion, your ethnicity, or your language, even your skin color. And most of those, again, you don't see that necessarily within your diversity, but it has a big impact on how we interact with one another. So I'm starting with all this just to kind of paint a picture of what's the situation here that we may or may not be aware of. Take this, for example. So this circulated the internet a few years ago. I don't actually know how the individual in this picture felt about this situation, but certainly the people on the marketing team were thinking good intentions when they made this. They thought, yeah, we want to promote activity amongst our campus, so let's put, today is the day we take the stairs on our elevators. Not realizing that maybe this is an ableist point of view. Not everyone's going to be able to take the stairs. And that's just another kind of reminder that I can't use my legs, I can't use those stairs. So that's where a lot of the pain actually comes from that we don't realize is without thinking about it. We had good intentions, but we kind of destroyed someone's day again. It just takes something that small. So ableism is another thing to consider when designing your classrooms or your activities is this going to be accessible to everybody that can move or cannot move? Going on to other diverse identities, this is one of my favorite comics that was circulated when I was teaching elementary school kids. And the student next to the teacher says, "Sorry teacher, but where do the kids whose most salient identity isn't gender and instead self-identify as awesome light up?" And that comes from the habit of sorting people into girls versus boys, ladies and gentlemen. Just to clarify, for those who aren't aware, your sex and your gender are different. So your sex is the biological makeup of who you are, and your gender is an identity that you have in your mind. So very different things. And the science is that early on in utero, your sex is forming, and then it's not till the next trimester that your identity actually starts to form with your brain. So there's a huge gap in between. Meaning that there's a wide spectrum of gender identities that you could have, and it's not necessarily going to match up 100% with your sex. So an anecdote of this was when I was doing a professional development session as a teacher, the session opened asking me to write down 3 identities of myself that I consider really core to who I am. And after I did that, the presenter asked, how many of you actually put gender down on there? And maybe a third to half of the people raised their hands. And it was kind of shocking for me because I realized that, yeah, I identify as a woman, but that's not a big part of who I am, but it's a big part of how the world has treated me up to this point. They see a woman, so they've already decided a few ways of how the situation is going to go when they interact with me. And for some people who aren't cisgendered, or they don't identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth, saying things like ladies and gentlemen can be another kick in the groin, kind of like, oh my gosh, again, really, we're going with the binary, when there's so much more than just your gender to your identity. And of course, probably the big one that's most talked about in media, I suppose, these days, is that of race. And I want to show you another clip, which gets really passionate, but I want you to consider how you think of racism. Is it an act you do, or is it an act that happens when you're not doing anything? So let's see what this has to say.
I didn't respond to your saying that, that I create my own racial predicament by my thinking and my attitude.
You block your progress.
I block my own progress.
By allowing your attitude toward the white man to limit you.
I think the police limit me. I think that white supremacy has placed limitations on where I can go and what I can do, but I don't think that I cause my own predicament under white supremacy. By white supremacy, I don't mean neo-Nazis, and I don't mean Klan, because I'm terrified of those people on an interpersonal basis. Institutionally, not terribly much, because most of the lethal, toxic, deadly racism that African American people experience and that other people of color experience in this country does not come from them. It comes from moral, fair-minded people who believe that they are lovers of justice, churchgoers, people who experience themselves as decent and actually very nice folk. And it is there that I find my fear. Back to the question of what it means to be white. I think what it means to be white, in part, is that you have the privilege of blaming people of color for their own victimization under white supremacy. I've heard you say that to me. I've heard you say that to him. I've heard you say that to him. I've heard you say it to him. I've heard you say it to every person of color in the room who challenged your perception of yourself in the world. That is part of what it means to be white.
Maybe that's part of the answer. That we feel that the field is wide open, and each man can stand on his own.
No. Each man does not stand on his own. Some men stand on other men and other women. Light-skinned men. Men from Europe stand on the heads and the parts of men and women and children of color. That is, and of course, you also stand on the heads of white women. But no, it's not a question of every man standing on his own ground. All of the ground damn near of this planet has been taken from almost all of the people of color on this planet. Australia was a black continent. Africa was a black continent. And if the people themselves were not taken from Africa, then everything of value was taken from Africa to the extent that was possible. North America was a red continent. South America was a red continent. You are not standing on your own ground. You're standing on red ground. And that's what it means to be white. To say that you're standing on your own ground and standing on somebody else's. And then mystify the whole process so it seems like you're not.
No, don't play it. Every time I watch that video, it gets me, because it's people like that gentleman that are screaming and trying to speak up every day, and a lot of people aren't truly listening. And it's kind of frustrating to know that there's people out there whose lives are hard every day. It's an uphill battle, and it's very slow progress to give that power back to them. I think part of the problem was that older gentleman saw himself as a good guy, but he was really a terrible bull in a china shop, just kind of knocking a bunch of stuff over. Because, again, he saw his playing field as here, and he thought, well, everyone should be on the same ground, like he said. So the thing about recognizing your privilege and trying to give power back to other people who might not necessarily have it is it takes a tremendous amount of effort and empathy and a lot of consideration and thought. And it's more energy than we're actually actively taught how to put forth every day. It's only something that an individual can choose for themselves. You can't force it upon other people. But the most effective way to deal with privilege and discrimination and diversity in any situation is to build upon yourself and try to keep that empathy open at all times, which, like I said, takes a lot of building. But it makes the world better for people like that man who was screaming, like, can you hear me? You're standing on my life, basically. Just for further consideration. So the reason why I started with all of that painful stuff to look at is because it helps us recognize, okay, so this is the world we live in. Now what can I do to actively make that better? And again, you can apply this to your classroom, or you can do it at work, or with your family or friends, even if you need to. With great power comes great responsibility. You guys read Spider-Man? Watched Spider-Man? This is from Uncle Ben. It's a great quote. It's very short, but I see it as very powerful because when we watch Spider-Man or read Spider-Man, we think, that's a quote for superheroes. If you've got a superpower, they've got to use it responsibly. But the truth is, a lot of us have a superpower, and that's all of the great privileges that we already have. We already have received this power without doing anything. So with that, it's our responsibility to try to actively give back. Yeah, let's talk about actual allyhood behaviors. If you've ever been to Alex's office, you'll know that he is a curator of comics. And this is one that spoke a lot to me. It's very short and very sweet, but it's got another powerful message. Two birds are talking to each other. I don't know why they're birds. I guess I have to read poorly drawn lines. But one of them says, I'm not trying to be a jerk. And a lot of us are that way. We don't try to be the jerk. We're a nice boy. The wise bird says, it isn't enough that you not try. You must actively try not to be a jerk. So just like with the racism thing, we think about it in terms of that's things that you do to be racist, but sometimes it's things that you just are that are racist. It's when you have to actively try not to be racist or sexist or whichever it is. Sometimes our prejudices that we don't know we even hold come out when we're not thinking about it or actively trying to put ourselves in a situation. If you ever get the chance, come by our cubicles and look at Alex's wonderful wall, because he does collect a lot of comics that are about really strong social issues like this one. I really like it. So the best thing you can probably do as an educator or just a person in general in society is living by example. So I'll give you a few small things that you can do day to day that would help out the world. Acknowledging Treaty 6 territory. Just like I opened up with this presentation, you can do that even in a small snippet. You don't have to do the whole thing that I did at the beginning. You can find little lines that you can copy paste just off of the university website that they've used in the past. The thing about this is it helps everyone start to clue into, oh yeah, I should be present in the day, but also in the past, and recognize what came before me. It's a very mindful exercise, and I like doing it because it just kind of makes you appreciate more that's around you in the moment. Advertise as an ally. So there's lots of stuff online that you can print off flags or little stickers. That's just to show that you're a safe person to approach. If you just Google ally sticker, like a ton of things will pop up. It's really helpful, even if you don't know that there's anyone in the class who might identify as queer or non-binary, trans, whichever it is. Showing other people that you're open to that and you're a safe person to approach, it's helpful to everybody, really, because trying to approach someone with any problem you might have is really terrifying. It takes a lot of effort, so making that easier for someone goes a long way. In your class resources, when you're teaching, see if you can find sources specifically by minorities and women, and do a little dig for that. because there are some out there, and sometimes it's hard to find, but it's worth the find because it really sends a message to other people who might identify as such that there's work being done out there and it's not just a world of old white men. This is one that Alex and I do that I think could go a long way, is to include your pronouns in your email signature. So right after your name, just in brackets, put she/her, he/him, or they/them. And that's not only inclusive of other identities beyond trans or queer, but it could also be helpful for English second language learners, for example, who might not be familiar with North American names, have no idea how to address you. You kind of take some of the mystery out of that by telling people right from the front, hey, this is how I like to be addressed, just to get the language really clear off the bat. Just like that little comic I showed you. Oh, just a second. Yes, Alex?
I just wanted to point out that the pronouns thing,
Yes.
just as, somebody who's named Alex, it's helpful to be a little bit humanizing to be like, oh, here's who this is, because Alex is not helpful as a gender name at all.
Right, yes, for my online participants. If you have a name that's kind of ambiguous, it's helpful to be clear. This is what gender that you should use in the pronouns when you address me, because Alex could be anything, right? And in like the little comic that I shared earlier with the students saying, hey, I'm awesome, I'm not a girl or a boy. Instead of saying ladies and gentlemen, start to kind of be mindful of that, because you might have a room where there are people who don't fit into either category, and hearing that can be another stab in the side, like, oh, there it is again, I don't fit into either of those categories. They're just students, or they're visitors, or they're professionals. There's so many different other nouns that you can use to address people that isn't solely about their gender. And presenting yourself as approachable. This is a physical one, actually. If you were able to attend our session, I think this was in November or December, about using voice. Was that in November, Alex? Look it up. Anyway, we had two people here who were coaching us on effective speaking practices. And one of the practices they actually went through with us was how to stand and teach with people. So things that you can do to be approachable is kind of set your legs a little farther apart than feels normal, and always present your forearms. And this is kind of a strong, vulnerable position, being like, I'm not defensive, I'm open to you, you can come talk to me. Another really good thing to do is drop what you're doing if you're in the middle of writing an email when someone comes to talk to you, and turn and face them and keep eye contact. Because like I said, sometimes, no matter the situation, approaching someone and asking them for help or having a conversation can take so much effort and can be so anxiety-ridden that it's a horror to go talk to your instructor sometimes. So if you do what you can to look like you're going to be safe, friendly, happy, they can say anything and you're not going to shut them down, that goes so far. I can personally say, oh my God, please be an approachable instructor, because I was a really scared student all the time. Ultimately, the number one thing to take away from all of that is remember that we are all just human beings. We're all persons. We all just kind of, at the very core of us, want to be relatable and approachable. We want to be cared for. We're all kind of unified in that. So approach every day every person as you and I are people. We have something in common. Or at least that helps me going around every day. Just as an example, I got this from A Guide to Being a Trans Ally, which is a really helpful resource, free. If you Google it, it pops up first thing. This is an excerpt from an individual named Jay. And Jay said, I'm still not completely out as trans, but one thing I did do was change my name on my personal Gmail account from Jessica to Jay. My sister-in-law noticed, and she sent me a wonderfully supportive email where she asked what pronouns I prefer, and whether I'd like to be addressed by my niece as Uncle Jay instead of Auntie Jess. Being offered that kind of support by a trans ally without even asking really made me feel more comfortable about being out around my family. And what I want you to take away from that is that someone else was actively trying to help out. So I myself, I know I like to think of myself as a supporter, and I want to be an ally to a lot of groups of people, but I don't tend to be vocal about it, or I don't find many opportunities to do something to actually help. For people who might be going through some sort of oppression, they have to put a lot of effort into every day, and it's the least I can do to find little ways to help out to make their day a little easier. So where you can, try to find opportunities where even just being somewhere, like at Pride Parade, though unfortunately I don't think we can do that this year, it seems like it was canceled, but just going out to do something small like that to show some sort of support can make a big difference, rather than being silent and just saying, if the moment arises, I'll help you. Some people might not know that you're willing to do that. All right, practicing diplomacy. So you've done all of these things, living by example, showing your students that you're open and you want to support them, but now you're actually in a situation in class where someone's done something that might be kind of blowing the lid off of things, or potentially blowing the lid off of things. Some things that you can do is request certain behaviors or language. Don't tell. So especially for adult learners, they might already feel embarrassed if you're calling them out on something that they've done that makes them uncomfortable. It's going to get their hackles up and they're going to be on the defensive almost right away, for most people in my experience anyway. So try to make it as soft as a request as possible, because just like a few of the people that we saw already today in these videos, they didn't realize that they were already breaking some china. If you form it in the, like, okay, this is the behavior I want to see, rather than don't do that, it's going to go over a lot easier, and it's not going to be as combative. Just like that being approachable thing, be mindful of your body language. So they need to feel like you're approachable as well. So do your best to face them, make eye contact, do a vulnerable position. Don't cross your arms and your legs, because that already looks like I'm gearing for a fight. You want to keep yourself as calm and as relaxed as possible so that they see, okay, there's no trouble here. Make sure to actively listen. If that person has something that they need to say to get off their chest, maybe there's a wound there too that they need to say it, and if you interrupt them, it just causes more pain, right? Let people speak their mind if they need to, because it already takes a lot of courage to start talking. So even if you feel like your emotions are getting in the way and you're starting to feel frustrated with what's going on, remember that they might feel just the same. And it's easier to get all those emotions out of the way if you let people speak their mind if they need to. Don't forget your manners, even if they have, because that goes a long way to diffusing the situation if it has started to blow out of control. Please and thanks has insurmountable power. Even sorry does. Even if you don't want to hear an apology, sometimes if someone's like, oh, okay, sorry about that, it's helpful to hear. It makes things go back down to a place of normalcy where you can communicate effectively. Back up people who speak out. So again, it takes courage to say something. You start to feel a lot of tension when you start talking. It's like, ooh, it's scary. So if something happens in your class and someone says, hey, that's a behavior that actually hurts, I need you to hear me out and do something different. Support that person too. The support is just knowing someone's on your side, even if things don't work out, goes towards building a better future overall, bit by bit, I would say. And ultimately too, I mentioned this earlier, but you want to confront behaviors and not people themselves. It's easy to take something like that personally, but it's important to remember that the way you behave on the surface isn't necessarily who you are as a person. It's not necessarily your values that are speaking. For example, you might see people who laugh at funerals. They're not necessarily doing it to be disrespectful. They're doing it because maybe they don't know how to behave, or so much is up in the air right at that moment that they need to giggle. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person, right? So someone else who might be acting out in your class or kind of being a jerk, not necessarily who they are. So always try to remember to separate behaviors from people in any given situation. Because it could be on a normal day, that person's just absolutely roses and daisies. You don't like confrontation? No one else does either. So you don't need to get heated or confrontational in any sort of situation, even if you feel like that's where it's going. The gist of it is that confrontation actually never works in transforming how people think or behave. It, in fact, can have the opposite effect, where they think, that person called me out on this, I'm so mad at them, and then you take 2 steps backwards. All of a sudden, they're saying all those offensive things again, they didn't make any progress, your classroom's the same or worse than it was before. I also got this from Guide to Being a Trans Ally. Really good resource, I suggest that you seek it out. Trying to step away from any aggression or frustration that you feel, and remember, behavior not person, tip of the iceberg. Being vulnerable and open has way more chances of effectively supporting positive change in your classroom and your day-to-day life. And probably most importantly is being resolute in your plan of action. And by that, I mean choose something for yourself that you're going to do differently, just 1 or 2 small things to start out with, and decide for sure that's what I'm going to do every day. You could even write it down on a slip of paper and post it somewhere where you see it often, in your office, or you can post it online if you teach an online course. Just somewhere that is a constant reminder of what it is you're going to set out to do to change things in your classroom or wherever it may be. I would suggest things like being proactive, so dealing with things before they even start. So that living by example is the foundation. Adding that pronoun into your signature, or not using ladies and gentlemen anymore, saying just students. Small changes are what's going to set the stage for even bigger changes later on. Trying to address behaviors before they happen, or even if no one's raised concerns in a classroom, can go a long way to dealing with fires before they begin. Being decisive in your action. So something arises in class. Go with your gut and decide right then and there, am I going to stop class and address this situation because it seems heavy enough? Or is this light enough that I can say, we're going to shelve this, we can discuss it after class, but for now we'll get back to the learning outcomes at hand. There's actually facts that show we've got a lot of nerve endings going on in our stomach, so when you feel something in your gut, you are thinking with it, and most of the time it's really effective to go with your gut. So whatever you're feeling here at that moment in the situation, pick your action and go with it instead of kind of flopping back and forth. Because when you get your head involved, sometimes it's easy to not be as resolute about what you're doing. Always remember to be supportive of everyone. Like I said, we're all people at the very core of ourselves, and we all need that kind of support. Feeling like the bad guy is kind of crushing. Like at some point in your life, you might be the villain in someone else's story, but you're the protagonist of yours. And so being told that you're the bad guy or feeling like the bad guy, it sucks. And you're like, hey, no, I'm not. And you get defensive, and that's where things kind of roll backwards. So do what you can to show support for everyone that you're talking with, even the people who kind of seem like they could learn a thing or two about being respectful to others. And finally, have humility. Speak up for people, but don't speak for them. Others in your classroom, if you discover that they have some sort of diverse identity or they're going through an oppression, they're not your teachable moments. They're still people too. So try to defend their rights, but in a way that you're not the hero of the day. You're still there for them. If they want to speak out, let them have the floor. If they don't want to speak too much, don't draw too much attention to it. Just know that there are small ways that you can give power back, but don't smother them with it. So, I was going to, well, I can still do this. I'm going to leave you with 2 activities that you could actually practice, again, with a class or at a workplace or with your family if you want to. Just to set some context for the activities first, I read through this 6-page paper by this women's studies academic named Peggy McIntosh. If you do a Google search of her name, or just the name of the paper, which is White Privilege Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, it'll show up. It's a free read online. The context for this quote was she was thinking about all of the privileges she had in relation to her coworkers of color. And she ended up writing down just one list of 26 things in one day of things that she had access to that they did not, which ranged from things like if she goes to the grocery store and looks for Band-Aids, she'll find them in her skin color. Or to things like if she went to a neighborhood that she wanted to live in, she didn't necessarily have to worry about being turned away because of her skin color. And from that list, she wrote, I repeatedly forgot each of the realizations on that list until I wrote them down. For me, white privilege turned out to be an elusive and fugitive subject. The pressure to avoid it was great, for in facing it, I had to give up the myth of meritocracy. That's the word I was trying to go for earlier. If these things were true, this was not such a free country. My life was not what I had made it. Many doors open for my people through no virtues of our own. And just kind of like the acknowledging Treaty 6 territory exercise that I did in the beginning, what I like about this idea is that she was actively saying, okay, what do I have that I take for granted? So one of the activities that I want to leave you with that you can use in your day-to-day life or with others is just jotting down a quick list of things that you have access to or that you can do that others might not necessarily have. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. Take one sheet of paper that you got before at the beginning of this presentation and start writing down some of the privileges that you have that you take for granted. You can write it in your notebook too, Al. I'll give you 30 more seconds. So I'll share some of the things that I wrote down for myself. For example, I can read and write this list. I have use of my legs. If I need a loan, I can get it. My mental health is stable. I have access to food at just about all times. What I like about this practice is just journaling for myself every day and positive things of like, wow, this life is pretty great. I've got all of these things. Is there anything on anyone else's list that they'd like to share that they put down?
Access to transportation and healthcare.
Access to transportation and healthcare. Oh, I love healthcare. It's great that we just can walk in and get treatment. Yes, Amanda?
Access to family supports, be they alive and nearby.
Oh, access to family supports. Having people that care for you and people that you care for makes such a difference in our self-actualization, our day-to-day happiness. Did Nikki have something to say?
Yeah, conventionally attractive.
Conventionally attractive, which pretty girl powers, that is a benefit sometimes.
I said ability to pay for my children's education and extracurricular activities.
Being able to pay for your children's education and their activities. Holy moly. Some people don't ever get that. Yes, Al?
For myself, I could put that I can eat at basically any restaurant and the dietary restrictions I have usually aren't viewed with suspicion.
Right? If you have no dietary restrictions, you can eat just about anywhere, and no one's going to be like, oh, okay, so you don't want peanut butter, oh, for example. So again, I recommend doing this just for yourself. You don't even have to get your students to do this. This is just something for you to increase your day-to-day happiness and appreciation for what you do have access to that others may not. Was there any other comment from online?
Yeah, Nikki says, I thought I had debt problems until I met someone who was living on payday loans and pawn shops.
So recognizing your financial security compared to others is also a pretty big privilege. There's a lot of people who are not so secure. Another activity that I'll leave you with is something that's more doable in class if you feel it's appropriate or it's something that interests you. I want you to take the other piece of paper that I gave you, or if you don't have another one, you can use the blank space of the one you already have written on. And I want you to write down something that you've always wanted to achieve, your number one dream. You have to write it down.
Use my phone?
You can. I'm sorry to those of you online who can't participate in this one. I'll describe the activity to you after that.
Number one dream for ourselves.
Yeah, your number one dream or something you want to accomplish for yourself. Once you have that, I want you to crumple up the paper, and from where you're sitting, you can't stand up, you have to throw it into this box that I'm holding. Oh no, Amanda, you were 2 feet away from it.
It wasn't a full piece of paper, it was the right weight. Let me see what it was at.
And they know that's totally good.
Yeah, you can take it.
No, it's good.
Oh, the one not even close. Can I stand up?
You can stand up.
Very good.
Oh, no.
One more left online groups. No one accomplished their dreams. That's okay. It's just an exercise. So, variations of this exercise is usually you have a lot more students, you have a deeper room, and you tell them to write on a piece of paper what grade they want to achieve in their class, maybe, something to that effect. And then you tell them they have to land it in the basket in order to get that grade or else they fail. And what it's supposed to do is kind of give a perspective to people, much like that race video at the beginning, that the people in the front obviously have an advantage. They didn't do anything but sit there, whereas the people at the back probably aren't going to get the grade that they wanted to achieve because they were too far away. So that one's just kind of a perspective check of letting people kind of figure out where their playing field is and where other people's playing fields are, just to give you a solid activity to use in the future. And again, of course, I recommend you read this essay by Peggy McIntosh. Again, it's 6 pages long. It's like a 10-minute read. Very valuable, I find, to opening your perspective. No, I told you not to do that. And finally, here's some other resources that you can go to find other activities or other information about how to be a supportive ally and what things you can bring to the classroom to influence others. So there's straightforequality.org. That's where I got the Guide to Being a Trans Ally PDF. All of it is free. They might even have flags and stickers on there for you if you wish to print some off. There's also the University of Michigan's Inclusive Teaching Practices site. So that's for universal access, or designing your class in a way that no matter a person's ability or disability, they should be able to access your content just as easily. Very useful site. I quite like it myself. It also includes things like being aware of race and other cultures and languages and gender identities, so on and so forth. So it's a mixed bag, that middle one. And the U of A even has its own accessibility resources, which is, all of these are really easy. If you just Google them, they will appear for you. But of course, I'll be sharing this presentation as well, so all of these links and resources will be available to you just as easily. I wanted to leave you with this quote. It's from Ellen DeGeneres' stand-up, which is on Netflix, called Relatable. She ends this heartwarming comedy by saying, we want to grow, we want to feel good about ourselves, we want to feel proud of who we are, and we are all relatable. So like I said, at the foundation of every person you meet, you all have something in common in that you're human and you just want to be relatable. And if you carry that around with you every day, hopefully it'll be easier to meet everyone on the same playing field. That's it. Thank you. Scattered applause. So I hope that this was of use to you. Does anyone have any questions on the content? Okay, Brian?
So what happened to the situation that you brought up from the classroom?
I never actually heard what the result of that situation was. I do believe the instructor talked about gender-neutral terms to use instead, but beyond that, I'm not sure how it was received. Thanks for joining me today, and if you have any other questions, you can reach us at leolearn@ualberta.ca or our website at ext-leo.ca. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day.